What's up guys, it's me Jeremy. It's always fun to talk about what cards we might see in Hearthstone in the future, and of course to test out designs and theorycraft mechanics. And so today, we're taking a look at some of our favorite fan-made legendary cards in Hearthstone, and how well they might actually fit into the current game, so let's begin. For our first card, we're taking a look at Tiny Fin Forging by GatekeeperHS. And this card is really awesome from like a flavor perspective, since it's kind of supposed to be like a maybe cuter but less powerful Murloc version of Turalyon Forging. And it's actually quite solid in terms of playability as well. So, Anoyotron was a pretty decent card, did see some constructed play in the past, albeit mostly in mech decks, and Tiny Fin Forging trades away the extra point of toughness and mech synergies for a free Light's Justice and potential Murloc synergies. Now, Light's Justice by itself is a little bit of a, well, not so great card, but when you get it as an additional value from something else, it's proven to be quite powerful. I mean, just take a look at Muster for Battle. Not to mention that a Divine Shield taunt minion that gives you a 1/4 weapon is potentially one of the best anti-aggro cards possible. The Murloc synergies maybe won't favor it so much, although it would be cool that you could get this card off of Murloc Knight. Tiny Fin also does have some Death Rattle synergies though with cards like N'Zoth. Unfortunately though, Paladin is quite a weak class at the time of making this video, and Tiny Fin Forging might not be enough to bring it into relevance, but it is a pretty cool card and one that could easily see play in a decent Paladin deck. And I personally love these alternate takes on sort of like the lower mana cost legendaries, because every legendary we see, it's always this big, beefy dude that costs a lot of mana. So taking a look at some of the smaller mana cost ones, there's a lot of potential, and I think there's a lot that could be done in that design space. Next up, we have Impeded Pinprick by Oakcheese. If you thought Imp Gang Boss was annoying, well, just wait until you see the Imp Gang Boss. So the value on Pinprick is honestly quite insane, even if you don't do anything extra, but by jumping through a few hoops, you can exploit your Imp Gang Boss factory even just a little bit more, because if Pinprick dies in, even just 2 or 3 hits, you still get tons of value on him trading with minions, then the Imp Gang bosses he makes, and then the imps from the Imp Gang bosses that the Imp Gang boss makes. And if you throw in a Dread Infernal or 2, maybe some other ping effects, you're going to completely fill up your board with imps, their bosses, and their bosses' bosses. And this guy's kind of like the CEO of imps, and he's definitely not messing around. So this card, we got to be honest, probably too strong at the 6 mana slot, but the effect with that stat comparison is something that is just super cool and could be really interesting, and I would love to see this card make it into the game in perhaps maybe like a 7 or 8 mana cost slot. And it would definitely see play, at least this version would, in of course the more controlling Warlock decks, and it honestly might be good enough for the faster Warlock decks as well if it's released at 6 mana. Overall, it's maybe a little bit weak against like Deadly Shot or spells that kill it without dealing damage, but really, Pinprick is going to get you an insane amount of value. It's really awesome with the flavor, and it's really cool to see things taken to the next level. Next up, we have Darius Crowley, submitted by jaksalad. So this is an awesome warrior legendary that explores, at least in our opinion, some really sick design space. And it also is a famous Worgen character from the World of Warcraft universe. At 4 mana for a 3/2, he's not going to be the best deal stats-wise, but the effect makes that, pretty irrelevant. So when you play Darius Crowley, he actually heals your opponent to full HP and then does that much random damage split among all enemies. So if your opponent's at 10 health, it heals your opponent to 30 HP and then deals 20 damage randomly split among all the enemies. Now, if your opponent doesn't have any minions on the board, this essentially does nothing, since it heals them and then deals the same amount of damage that it healed. But if your opponent has a bunch of minions, really powerful board, and is maybe at a lower life total, Darius Crowley's going to let you heal them in order to, well, destroy their board. It's kind of like a Cthulhu effect, but maybe at like a reduced mana cost in exchange for completely healing your opponent. Now, healing your opponent is potentially a pretty small price to pay for blowing up their board, but there are also a few problems this card might run into. Darius is a warrior class card in this version, and although this kind of card does clearly fit better into a much more controlling deck, Control Warrior in specific doesn't really do all that much face damage until much later into the game. You can definitely combo Darius with things like maybe Alexstrasza to set up board wipes later, but on turn 7 or 8 when you really need to deal with the board, Darius won't hit for too much damage. It's a great late game card, potentially maybe a little bit too great, might be a little bit better in a more costly version, but overall it's a really awesome card and explores some incredible design. It's a great control option, could be a really cool unique effect, and it's a very interesting trade-off. We have so many cards that will sacrifice board presence in order to deal face damage, but Darius Crowley does the exact opposite of letting your opponent heal at the cost of gaining some board presence. Next up, we have Cmon, submitted by Swaggerino. So one of the key characters in Warcraft lore, probably one of the more iconic characters in World of Warcraft that hasn't made it into Hearthstone just yet. This guy is coming out with a pretty sweet card. So now a lot of you guys might be thinking, oh, this might just be a worse Flame Wreath Faceless, but that is definitely not the case with Cmon actually. So let's take a look. Of course, we have the 4 mana 7/7, which is obviously quite an amazing effect, and then we have the drawback, which is just completely destroying your hero power. So how big of a deal would that really be? How big of a drawback is destroying your hero power? Because it actually would be quite a serious deal. So this is a Warlock card, which means you would lose your life tap, and life tap is one of the best hero powers in the game. It's what allows Zoo handlock decks to be such a powerful thing, and losing access to it for the rest of the game is devastating. It's honestly potentially not all that worth it, even for a 4 mana 7/7, at least not on the surface, until we start thinking about cards that might make up for this. Warlock actually has access to quite a few cards that might make the drawback of this effect not that big of a deal. A lot of lists are going to play Lord Jaraxxus, which replaces the hero power. If you want to take full advantage of Cmon, you could play like Finley, you could play Spell Show Side Eater as well. There's a lot of cards that might replace your hero power or give you a new one even after you've already destroyed it. So this might not necessarily be the best solution, since your new hero power is pretty much always going to be worse than life tap unless it's Jaraxxus. But overall, this is actually quite a cool effect of a card that has such a strong stat line that could let you snowball the game or just seal out a victory, but at the cost of just taking a huge risk. And you're saying that, okay, I'm going to play Cmon and win the game on the spot. And it's a pretty interesting design and could be a pretty unique addition to Hearthstone. And these sort of mechanics are the kind of thing that I really want to see being added into the game. These sort of like crazy effects that have the potential to do all sorts of interesting synergies and strategies, and overall just really introduce a lot of interesting new mechanics. It's something we haven't really seen all that much come to Hearthstone, and something we can hopefully see in the future. Next up, we have a legendary called Elwyn The Shaper by Erebus9997, and it's a really awesome card that's kind of like a repeatable forbidden shaping effect almost. Hearthstone definitely needs more legendaries with static effects like maybe Ragnaros, Kel'Thuzad, etc. These repeated interactions really add a lot to the game and can be really skill intense and just such interesting interactions overall. Well, I guess maybe Ragnaros isn't the best example, but you kind of get the idea anyway. Elwyn's really cool in the sense that if she survives a few turns, you get to make a lot of decisions of really just how much mana you want to pour into her, how much mana you want to use on the cards in your hand, your hero power, all sorts of stuff. And she adds a repeatable outlet for your mana, which some other cards maybe have, but is a really cool design space that Hearthstone should definitely explore more in the future. As for the card itself, Elwyn is probably pretty okay. If the turn comes down, you get a 5/8, maybe something between a Wisp, maybe a Millhouse Manastorm if you're a little bit lucky, unless there's some Innervate or maybe coin shenanigans. But if she lives for just a single turn, she becomes an incredible win condition, and you get to start snowballing the board and just going off and really summoning a lot of really cool stuff with her. Up next, we have High General Turalyon, submitted by Maysick, which is actually a famous paladin character from the World of Warcraft universe. And this guy's really awesome because he's got a lot of different synergies going with him, most of which are kind of just general paladin synergies. First off, you have your hero power, other cards that make recruits being improved, and just making all bigger recruits and all sorts of stuff. And especially with cards like Justicar Trueheart, High General Turalyon's going to let you pump out tons of large Silverhand recruits. But that is also not the only thing this card has going for it, actually. If you take a look at it, if you cast Blessing of Kings or maybe other buffs on Turalyon, then these Silverhand recruits he makes are going to be even bigger, even better. Now that's a lot of work to go through for some 6/6 recruits, but if you ever play him, he survives a turn, or maybe if you play him when you have 10 mana, you're going to make some really crazy cards, some really powerful creatures, and overall he creates some really crazy combos without being too broken. You still have to invest quite quite a lot to make things work with him, and this really is sort of like a combo card, and combo cards are something that I really want to see come to the game more in the future, and Turalyon explores some really cool design space and could potentially be a really cool addition to mid-range paladin decks in general. So our final card on the list, and probably my favorite, is Kilrogg Deadeye by Bionics90. So not only was this Orc Chieftain an awesome character in the World of Warcraft universe, he's probably one of the coolest and most interesting creations that I've ever seen, really. You know, having a card discover its own death rattle effect is just such a fun concept, and we could definitely see something like this in the future. You know, maybe cards that discover their own battle cry, stat buffs, things like that, like discovering card effects that aren't really just a card that you draw or a card that you add to your hand is something that is just so interesting and would be such an incredible direction to take the Discover mechanic in general. And Discover is probably one of the best Hearthstone mechanics that's been introduced into the game since its release. It's something that, you know, the community loves, it's a lot of fun, but also introduces some skill elements, some RNG as well, without really being too broken or having the RNG completely decide the game. And discovering death rattle effects, or maybe even like a battle cry or just some sort of effect for your creature, is something that could be just super cool, but also skill testing as well. And honestly, I believe that this sort of effect would be incredible design and is something that I just would love to see come to the game. And this version of Kilrogg, maybe he's a little bit too overpowered, but this exploration of sort of this mechanic, this kind of thing, is something that I just, oh man, I would love to see it come to the game. So which one of these cards was your favorite? Definitely let us know in the comments below, and looks like that's going to be it for me. If you guys enjoyed the video, drop a like, subscribe if you want. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.